Hello! For my project, I decided to visit some local places and see how they connected to what we've been learning all semester. So come take a walk with me, my dog, and my mom. I went to Bicentennial Park, which is just a short walk from my house, and took pictures and videos of the landscape around me. I began by following this stream. The stream began in this pond here and left through an outlet. In Chapter 14, I learned about streams and rivers and how they work. One aspect of a stream is the stream's gradient, which is the stream's change in elevation. As you can see here, the water moves down this hill as it travels, where it is eventually collected in another pond. As I walked further downstream, I got a closer look at the inlet where the stream enters the small pond. I watched as the stream flowed into the pond and took a look at the rocks that were embedded in the stream. They were brown, worn down and smoothed out by the water. This form of erosion is known as physical weathering. The water running over the rocks, as well as the rocks bumping into each other, causes the rocks to become smooth. I walked around and kept looking at the pond. Seeing the pond reminded me of our field trip stop at Mirror Lake. The difference between the pond here and Mirror Lake is that this pond has a natural inlet and outlet, while Mirror Lake only has a natural outlet. In Mirror Lake, the water enters through tubes in the ground, as we learned at our field trip stop to the inflow of Mirror Lake. This stream has a natural inflow, where the water enters from a stream. The outlet of this pond reminded me of our field trip stop at the Mirror Lake Dam that leads to Roberts Brook. I watched as the water left the pond and flowed further downstream. The flow rate of this water depends on the hydrologic cycle, as we talked about in Interlude F. When there's a lot of rain, the rate of outflow of the pond will be much more rapid than when there is a drought. As I followed the river downstream, I found another interesting spot. Here you can see the erosion that has taken place because of the stream. This tree is located right at the edge of the stream bank, and due to rain and the movement of the stream, the soil has been relocated to a point farther downstream. This is another form of physical weathering, this time on the soil instead of the rocks. This spot also shows how the stream gradient changes throughout the stream. Here the stream is wide and moves slower than at other points in the stream. At this spot, we can also see the hill on which the trees are growing. Because of the erosion at the base of the tree, it is likely that a slump will occur. A slump is a slow mass wasting event that occurs when there is a lack of support materials or there is too much weight added to a slope. Since the soil holding the tree in place is slowly eroding away, it is likely that the tree and sediment will eventually move down the slope. Outside of the park, I walked around my house to find other locations that connected to our material. First, I looked at the stones we have lining our backyard. On closer inspection, I saw ripples in the stones, just like ripples I saw at our field trip stop to the ITB building. I also looked at the stone walls that we have in two different locations in our yard. This reminded me of our field trip stop to the stone wall at the President's Garden. It was really cool to see something at school on a field trip stop for our class, and then go home and see something in my own backyard that reflected what we learned about. I wanted to keep this project very close to me in the places that I visited, so for my American landscape parts, I decided to focus on 3 places that I have been to, the first being Little Cottonwood Canyon in Utah. I've been out to Utah twice to ski, and both times it was incredible. It wasn't until I took this class, though, that I really thought about the geography of where I was and began connecting the dots. First of all, there's the mountain formation, as we talked about in Chapter 9. Mountains can form in many different ways, such as subduction, collisions, and continental rifting. The mountains at Little Cottonwood Canyon were formed due to rifting. This is because residing in Utah is the Wasatch Fault Line, which is responsible for the formation of the steep mountains in the area. As we learned in Chapter 2, the Earth is split into many different tectonic plates, which are separated by fault lines. When the fault line was active, it placed tension on the crust in various places, and the mountains were able to form. At first, that was all they were, just mountains with no easy way of traversing them. This all changed because of a glacier. As you can see, when driving up the mountains every day, we would drive through this U-shaped valley. This valley was caused by a glacier cutting its way through the mountains. Another interesting fact is a trail I skied on was called the Cirque. It was a wide-open trail that resembled a bowl, and at the time I thought nothing of it. I just thought it looked pretty interesting. After reading this chapter of the textbook, I found out that a cirque was a bowl-shaped depression that was actually caused by a glacier. It was really cool to read something in a textbook and have it relate to something that I'd seen in my life, and I was really excited about that. One thing I thought of when looking back at these pictures was a quote from the Barry Lopez culture reading, when Lopez was looking out at the icebergs surrounding him and said, "They were so beautiful they almost made you afraid." While I can't say that I've ever really felt that something was so beautiful that I was scared, I would say that this trip was the closest I have ever been to feeling that way. The mountains in Little Cottonwood Canyon were beautiful, and I hope I can go back there again someday. The second location I want to talk about is Block Island. I've been going to Block Island since I was a kid, and this project opened a unique opportunity to look at the same places over the span of a few years. First off, I want to talk about erosion. Block Island has a lot of sandy and rocky cliffs that are in danger of aggressive erosion. Here's a spot I visited in 2019 where you could walk and look down this bluff to the beach below. It was a really neat spot to walk on, towing the edge of stepping too far and falling straight down. When I went back in 2022, the area was blocked off. Erosion had made the area too unstable, and there was no longer enough room to walk out and look at the cliff safely. Another thing that these pictures can show is how the landscape has changed over time. Here's a beach called Mohegan Bluffs in 2019. Here's the same beach in 2021. Here is the exact same beach in 2022. In 2019, the beach was a lot sandier, with fewer rocks. 3 years later in 2022, it was less of a sandy beach and more of a rocky one. These pictures can also show the difference in tide when we visited. In 2019, when we visited, the beach was at low tide. This can be seen by the large amount of sand visible in the picture. Also, when looking at the rocks, there appears to be a line where they're darker. There's also some spots where you can see some green seaweed. This is because when it is high tide, the rocks are covered by the seawater. As you can see, when we went there in 2022, the tide was much higher and less of the beach was visible. That being said, some points on the coast remain largely the same over time. Here is the tip of the island in 2019. Here it is in 2021. The coastline looks almost exactly the same, the rocky beach remaining largely unchanged. This can also be seen at the very tip of the island when we walked out to check it out. Here is the very edge of the island in 2019. Here it is in 2021. And here it is in 2022. Despite the changes of Mohegan Bluffs, this beach, for the most part, has remained unchanged. The final location I would like to touch upon briefly is Bailey Island in Maine. It is a small island in Maine, and I visited it last October. I wanted to bring it in as another example of what a coast can look like. Coasts aren't always sandy beaches, as seen here. Bailey Island was made up of rocky coasts, almost like jagged fingers reaching out into the water. It was a really cool place to visit, with a beautiful coastline unlike anything I'd seen before. I was so used to the coastlines in Connecticut and Rhode Island, with all the beaches with sand, that I never thought a coast could look like this. I loved climbing all over the rocks to explore the whole area, and it showed me how cool different parts of the earth are. At the end of the day, all of these places come together to prove the point that we have been working towards all semester. The earth works together as a whole, not as separate parts functioning on their own. As we learned in the podcast, the earth isn't just green or blue. There are the whites of the snow-capped mountains, the browns of the trees and rocks and parks, the dark streams that run by, the yellow of the beaches, the blues of the ocean, and so many more. The earth couldn't function as many parts working on their own. It relies on all of them working together to create life as we know it. The entire planet comes together with all of these different places, some of them right outside your house, and others halfway across the country. We just need to open our eyes and take a look at them and begin to appreciate the beauty and science around us.